Got another 5 seconds. And it's time. Good afternoon, Brandon Oaks and all the ships at sea. We're glad to have you this afternoon to share in our Reflections program. The Reflections today is the Reverend Dr. Norman Bakken. He prefers to be called pastor, but I love to say the Reverend Doctor. That's fun. Well, anyway, Norm's going to share some history and background, some of his career progressions, particularly some world assignments, and then thoughts on the cultures and peoples that he's encountered and some life lessons learned. I first met Norm at a men's Bible study here at Brandon Oaks. That's before the pandemic. He made some poignant comments about the wholeness of creation and the oneness of God's people. I thought it was really cool that he agreed with me on many of my thoughts on the subject. It was kind of like when in school, your teacher said, "Hey, good job, Jones." But anyway, after further visits with Norman, I was fascinated to learn a bit about his history of ministry and particularly his worldwide travels. So this reflection program is called Minister on the Move, Where in the World is Norm? It's a chance to share with all of the neighbors here the amazing career of the Reverend Dr. Pastor Norman Bakken. Norm, we'll get started. I'd like to ask you to give us some bit of history about your personal background.
Yes. Well, I began my so-called moves very early, before I was born, so that I was able to cross the ocean from Norway, where my parents were from, along with my brother, who had already been born there at 2 years old, and came to the United States. And I believe I went to Ellis Island with my parents when they applied as immigrants to move here, but I was still in my mother's womb. So I had a free ocean trip. And then we left from Ellis Island, New York, and went to Wisconsin, in the middle, southern part of Wisconsin. And that's where I was born in 1926. My brother was 2 years older than I. He's an August boy. And the fact that he was born in Norway meant that when the World War II came along, he could not join up because he was not a citizen. And he joined up with Camp Little Norway in Canada, which was sponsored by the Merchant Marine of Norway, which was one of the largest in the world, and was able to get into the Norwegian Air Force, did his training in Canada, and then went to England and fought in the air, and eventually entered New York with the occupation forces that liberated it from Germany. And then I was born in Madison, in Wisconsin, southern part. And from there, my parents moved us to Washington State. And I remember we first lived in a little place called Killick Marsh, somewhat close to Everett, Washington. And it was in Everett, as a young boy, that we finally moved into a house which was right across the street from a public park. It had 2 tennis courts and a lot of play area for kids. And that's where I became a great croquet player on the lawns. And that's where I met my wife. She was 10 and I was 11, and she was a fascinating little girl. And I just had to court her from the instant I saw her. So I tried to get her ahead in the croquet game. I was a city champion at 11 and 12. So I was pretty good at it, but I'd make sure she came in second, if not first. So that's the way it went. And she became quite meaningful for me because though we saw one another from time to time during those years of schooling, but it wasn't until I was a senior in high school that we really became acquainted, because she asked me to a Tolo dance, a dance where the woman comes with a car, picks you up, takes you to a ballroom, and then out to dinner afterwards. And that's where I realized she was no longer a little girl. So in a very short time, we were very much in love. And within a year or two after my graduation, we became engaged and applied for marriage. I married at 20. I stayed married for 69 years. But she was a wonderful companion. She was a very sociable, so that when we met new people, I always could count on her to make us feel right at home. I was born in Wisconsin, never came back to Wisconsin until much later. Then from Everett, where we moved, it happened to be during the Great Depression. And my father had become ill. He had been in a bank in Norway, but couldn't take on that work because he had all he could do to get money enough for us to survive. So we moved into town, into Everett, Washington, after having been on a little farm for a little while. And then after high school, I had by that time been persuaded that my field ought to be toward the ministry. We belonged to a little place. I belonged to a little place called Lutheran Free Church. It's a congregational form, and it stayed with me in that sense ever since. The idea was that the congregation set its own rules, and not from the outside. It was part of a congregational group of people. They owned a college. They established a college and seminary, Augsburg College and Theological Seminary in Minneapolis. And that's where I went in 1942, 43. And took a literature major there, and then went on into the seminary, Theological Seminary, which later became part of Luther Theological Seminary, which is in St. Paul. After graduating from college in Minnesota in 44, I took my work summer and winter so that I get through earlier. We had a chance to go to Oregon, where my wife's folks had moved. And there I found out that there was an opening in the education department of the school, public school. And I was asked if I'd be a physical education teacher and a coach, and which was not really my field, except I did like sports. And we had a wonderful year living with the folks and getting acquainted with that part of the world. We had 1 year. At the end of that year, I was offered several other jobs, but I was bound and determined to become what I had planned to be, a pastor. And so we returned to Minneapolis. But by that time, I was somewhat not in favor with the college Augsburg and seminary, they thought I was putting it off, but I wasn't really. I needed the money, and we needed to get our feet on the ground as a couple. Okay. While we were in Oregon with visiting folks, I was asked to be physical education, and I was coaching basketball. I'm not tall enough to be a basketball player, but we got a great team. We made it to the state tournament, and they faced the champions of the tournament in their first game. But it was the first time they'd been away from home, and they had eaten too much candy and weren't in the best of shape, so they lost that first game. From there, we returned to Minneapolis, where I studied, and we had an excellent professor in Old Testament and Hebrew. We had a lousy one in New Testament, which for me was, as in preparation for ministry, was very important. And so I right away decided that as soon as possible, I would, after experiencing parish, become a graduate student in studying New Testament. And my first call after graduating from the seminary was to a little congregation in Seattle, Washington, a suburb of Seattle, Richmond Beach, First Lutheran Church. And it was a struggling church. It had been on the home mission board for about 48 years. And within a year after I got there, we became totally independent. We had grown to a size of 250 families and had children in Sunday school, about 300 children in Sunday school. So that was a great thing. But I remember when we were in that parish, there was a campaign, the Billy Graham campaign came through Seattle. A lot of people went, including a few of our members. And one of the members thought that that's the kind of preaching we ought to have, bring them up and get them converted and enrolled. And I thought, oh, this is not the kind of theology I like. And so that inspired me all the more to take other consideration. But I had done very well as a pastor. So I don't know why, but I received an invitation from the president of our college and seminary to accept a scholarship to go to Wittenberg University and Hammer Divinity School in Springfield, Ohio. I went there and I studied for a year and earned a master's in sacred theology. Then the question was, where do I go now? Well, of course, I wanted to go on with my studies and got accepted at Union Theological Seminary in New York. No scholarship, really, just tuition and an office where I would be a teaching fellow. I taught Greek and studied. All this time supporting a family and travel and so forth. And I have to admire my wife because she had to put up with being married to a guy who didn't have a steady income, but was in the books all the time.
Norman, let me interrupt for a minute because shortly we're going to get into the slideshow that we prepared that's going to start your international travels. But I wanted to back up a little bit and ask, in your early schooling and before you actually, when you were headed towards your call to ministry, what created the passion for you to choose ministry as a career?
Well, at that time, I remember some of my buddies in school, and I had a lot of friends, began to engage in wilder parties and losing track of what was good sense. And I thought there ought to be someone who is in the ministry who would reach out to them and bring them around into a different way of life. And there wasn't. There was no outreach to youth at that time in the churches in our town. So that's because of the very devout, my devout parents. They weren't members of a church necessarily, but they sent us always to Sunday school. And in the Sunday school, I met a teacher who was the incarnation of the gospel. She's a very loving teacher, and it was through her that I knew what an adult can do to help a child who is trying to find his way.
Interesting. Okay. So that was kind of your mentor to get you started in your ministerial studies then. Yeah. Okay. Now, what I'd like to do, if we'd gotten through your college and all, but we did prepare some slides that started you after you kind of moving around the world. And I'd like to key in on that for some of this. You see the introductory slide, let's see. I should be able to get into a slideshow. Just a moment here. Apologize, but that there we go. Okay. This, as you had already brought us up to speed, but your ancestry was in Norway, and
later, when I come back to that, the next stops I made were typical stops when we were on vacation from somewhere else.
okay. Moving, then your family immigrated through New York, is that correct?
Well, we went to Philadelphia, where I taught at the theological seminary there, and as an instructor in biblical languages and literature.
Yeah, okay.
And while I was there, I received a scholarship, a grant and aid to go to Germany to advance my studies further.
All right, hold just right there, because I'm going to run through this. You talked about your raising and college. I'm going to get over to the slide that starts your international travels, and there it is. Now, if you would continue, please. I'm sorry I interrupted you. Go ahead.
The first place I studied in Germany was in Tübingen, which is the center of Germany. And there was a remarkable teacher, professor of New Testament. I went there to study with him. But inadvertently, I found out that the best faculty in that school was headed in the Old Testament, which I was also interested in. So that was my first touch of being in Germany.
Okay.
At the then that I came there by myself while I was at Philadelphia. Later on, when we were back to Germany, we were in Göttingen, southern part of Germany, and my family was with me. My wife and we had 3 children at that time, and 4, in fact. Two of them had to attend the higher high school in German, and our youngest, John, was in the grade school. By the time we left there, he was the one who knew German as it was spoken by the local people. When we traveled with him, they always thought he was, how did we get a German son? Because he spoke such good German.
All right, you had mentioned that you, while based in Germany, you'd done some more study and research for Spain and Portugal.
Yeah, I might mention that when we were in Göttingen, the place that we had for a living was a rental area, and she kept raising the rent on these rich Americans that came. And so we finally left. I had took my books and knowledge I needed with me, and we went to a visit down to Spain and eventually to Portugal. And then after that year, when I was on that study leave, we visited Netherlands and Denmark and Norway. Eventually, then I had enough credits, and I'd passed my dissertation at Union and received my PhD degree from Union Theological Seminary. But while I was there, again, I wasn't free. I had to serve a Danish congregation in order to make ends meet. And so that was an experience. We were in Brooklyn. I served the what they called the Happy Danes. There were Happy Danes and Holy Danes, and in a church in Brooklyn. And from there, we went to the seminary, which is south of there, in Philadelphia.
All right, and you got your PhD at Union Theological Seminary.
Yes.
Okay. And then I show you going back to, let me back up. Oop.
Yes.
Yeah, to St. Paul.
After I was on in Philadelphia for a couple of years, then my original seminary at St. Paul Luther Seminary called me as an instructor, then eventually full professor in New Testament.
Okay. Oop. All right, and from there, how in the world did you get to Tanzania?
Well, after teaching 5-6 years in Luther, I was eligible for a sabbatical leave, and I wanted to. Some of the history of our biblical work had come through the oral tradition, and I wanted to go to Africa, where they still had their traditions handed on orally more than in writing. So it was important for me to see what the process was. How did people pass from one generation to another their own past? And that was a very valuable study for me for two reasons. One, this academic side, which is important, but the other important thing was the people. The people of Tanzania, of Africa, are splendid examples of people who take care of one another and have respect for the elders. I was considered an elder there, and they would address you as mzee, which means an elder, and it was a term of real respect. And I thought Americans could learn something from that. Eventually, some of the people from Tanzania were studying at my seminary, at Luther Seminary. One of them returned to Tanzania, became the bishop of the Northern Diocese, a good friend of mine all through life.
Okay. Let's see, did you cover Brazil there? Yeah.
No, not yet. after several years at Luther Seminary, I had an opportunity to change gears. The school, the theological college in southern Brazil, in Pematang Sianta, which is way south, was a Lutheran theological seminary, the only one in Brazil, which is largely a Catholic country. And I was asked to go there and teach. And I was there for 4 years. And then when I found out that they had a man who had studied in Brazil and went to Germany, was getting his PhD, then I decided it was time for me to yield and have that person come a native to teach in his own school. And at that time, I was called to Jamaica, where the United Theological Seminary, which is part of the University of the West Indies at Jamaica. And I was there for 2 years. And from there, we went, we retired. We left after 2 years and went into Southern California and found a delightful place to live in a little place called Fallbrook, California. And from there, we had all kinds of other trips. I did a lot of supply work where there were vacant parishes. They'd ask me to come on Sundays and fill in. And then from there, we went to those places. 3 times we went to Hawaii and to 2 different islands. They were delightful way of spending time. And then I was asked to take other years. I managed to get to Indonesia for a semester, got to Cambodia, and then I went to India, to the central part of India, and was there a year, and then came home again, and then went back to India again, to the western part of the state. And by that time, my family, which had, my children had accompanied me through a lot of this stuff. So one of my daughters had actually taken the job in Tanzania, became a head of a hospital there. And so we went back to visit her. And after visiting her in Tanzania, we had to come back home. And that meant that we were going to fly. We stopped in Egypt, took a trip down the Nile, and then flew from Egypt to Norway and back to San Diego, where I was retired. And then eventually it was Blacksburg first, and then here in this place in Roanoke. My wife.
Now, this slide, the little dots show all of your travels over time. As we go through and hear you verbally describe it, we get involved in individual sites, but when we start looking at where you have been in the world, we tend to answer our own question that we had Minister on the Move, where in the world is Norm? He has been all over the world. This is fantastic. What an interesting observation of that little blue planet that we have. I want to ask you while we're here, what's it like to adjust to different cultures? You've been South America, Middle East, Africa, Northern Europe, all over. You've even been to California. What's it like to make those adjustments to the cultural changes, Norm?
We found in most places people were very friendly, very open, and gracious. And it was always enriching for us to come to these cultures and learn from other people besides Americans. And it's good for Americans to find out others have something to offer. We're not the only country in the world that has rich cultural background.
Okay. Has the had would you do it all over again if you had your choice?
Well, yes, I think I would. But I don't know if I could have taken many corners to make it a little easier. It was not easy. It was a kind of a tough ground because I had to make sure that my family was okay and that they were getting along. And they, by the way, did very well. My two of my three had graduated from college. My one boy who didn't go to college, and was the most brilliant, he got a good job, and all of them have found, since their early experience involved so much travel, they also like to travel. So we see them quite often.
Okay. Our time's getting close to the end, but when I was visiting with you the other day, you had kind of a life quote that you had developed, and wonder if you can remember that about a love and canopy. Could you kind of close us up with that one quote?
I look this way, and kind of boils down what my theology is. Love is the canopy of life, and love is the essence of God. Love is the essence of God. So when you see people who are simply attracting attention to themselves and not to the one who gave them life, you have to ask a question: is it real?
That's
We've
great.
got to know. Yeah.
Norman, that's a beautiful way to close our program today. I thank you for sharing your reflections with our community. And we look forward to seeing you around and maybe asking some more questions from some of our residents. So again, thank you, and thank all the residents participating and watching this Reflections program. And that ends it for today.